What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Homie Hangout, where we help others move in excellence. And is the Norteño Black Alliance over? Was it ever really real? Is Black and Brown unity off the table? Is Northern California now going to be like Southern California? And what's going on, right? There's a lot of chatter. There's a lot of assumptions. There's a lot of comments, questions. People behind the wall are having some different experiences than they'd had, in recent years. And so I'm hearing it on predominantly Black channels, Raza channels, and just in my conversations with people in real life. And it's a sensitive subject, and my intention here is not to offend anybody, but to keep it 100, I probably will. And so hear me out is all I ask, and get in on the comments or whatever, and we'll go from there. But so I'm going to speak kind of historically and from my perspective, what I see. Okay. So I grew up in the Bay Area, right? San Francisco in particular, but I made my rounds. I'm 46, so really coming up in the 80s. And a lot of hoods in the Bay Area were predominantly Black, right? And so it was not uncommon, for me to be the only not Black person in the room or in the area, or the only non-Polynesian person to be in the house eating or whatever it may be, right? So a comfort comes from that, a familiarity. We're having a shared experience, a shared culture, you know. Now that has changed a little bit over time, okay, in a lot of spaces. And none of that was because of prison. None of that had anything to do with prison politics. It's not because people were told to behave a certain way. It's because we were fucking poor. And so we grew up in the cheapest places to live. We grew up in government housing, and that was the population of people that was poor and stayed there. It's just how it was. It's not rocket science, right? And that doesn't mean there weren't issues or whatever. And it wasn't a thing of people trying to act Black. It for one, that's a lazy ass statement. Okay, there's no such thing as acting like another race, because not all the people of another race or ethnicity or country or whatever behave the same. So I really dislike that phrasing. It's not one that I use. Maybe that'll be a video for another time. And listen to the book that I'm gonna start reading tomorrow. But anyways, back to this topic. So we came up together, right? Now I'm gonna use East Palo Alto as an example. I've used it as an example for other things before. It's not where I'm from, but I lived there for quite a while and have a lot of experience there. And it's just a good example in this case. EPA back in the days, before it was even a city, right? They were gonna call it the New Nairobi Village, right? That's why the Ville in East Palo Alto, the Ville neighborhood is the village, Nairobi Village. That didn't work, and they wound up calling it East Palo Alto. But it goes to show kind of the mindset there, right? It there was a lot of kind of Black consciousness. You think about the Panthers and the breakfast program and the internal education program. East Palo Alto had all that, right? It was kind of a mecca. It was a Bay Area hotspot for that movement, right? And so that's their history. And they were kind of pushed aside. There's a lot of oppression, kind of stuck over in this area. There's a whole history there that I'm not going to get into right now, but they made the best of the spot that they had, and they made it their own, really. Going through it in the 80s, you hardly seen any raza out there. You hardly seen any Polynesians. There were a few, right? But not a handful. And the way the neighborhoods there were divided up, they were all Black neighborhoods, right? Sac Street, the Ville, the Gardens, Midtown, later on M&M, right? Midtown Menlo, because of East Menlo Park. Those were just the hoods. And then comes this idea of being a norteño, right? Which also popped off, in the 80s in particular, in a lot of spaces in the Bay. So you had hood dudes that were raza that now were like, oh, now I'm a norteño, I'm this northern, right? But you're still from the same spot. You know what I'm saying? And so Sac Street gets this identity as, oh, Sac Street's a norteño clique in EPA. Sac Street been a hood, so to speak, way longer than anybody was claiming norte out there, you know? It just so happens the raza from there were like, okay, cool, I guess we're norteños too. But they beefed with other hoods for hood shit reasons, Look at East Palo Alto now. Well, not now, pre-Facebook. Now it's whatever. But rewind like 10 years, right? East Palo Alto hadn't had a grocery store since the 70s. Right? I think Safeway was the last one over there by Whiskey Gulch. For those that know, you know. and Mi Pueblo was coming in, right? A grocery store that predominantly caters to Mexican Latino communities, right? And especially ones that are on the lower income scale, right? So Mi Pueblo is like, hey, we want to open up right here, and there's a space for them. Shit went crazy. Like allegedly, there's guns pulled out at city council meeting. Like folks are mad, and a lot of the black population was like, hey, but what about us? Like, are they going to hire us for our jobs? Or they this? And really, what it was is it was another sign that they were losing their community. That EPA was changing. Because if you looked at the leadership and you looked at the people that went on TV and everything else, a lot of those folks were black, right? But there was more Tongans in East Palo Alto at the time than black people, if we're just going to be real. And there was a gang of raza, right? It was a overwhelmingly raza community, but its history was as a black community. There wasn't really race issues back in the days. But then, like I said, go back these handful of years. It's not just issues at city council, it's also issues on the block. Folks reigniting beefs that they didn't even understand in the first place. And we're gonna beef with Sac Street, and that means the Norteños and the Sac Street Norteños wear long hair, and which that shit wasn't true, right? Most Northerners from East Palo Alto ain't from Sac Street. I mean, damn, it's just one block. It's a dead end block, right? So it's not a huge hood. Shout out Sac though. But so violence issues. Now you got black people shooting at brown people because they have long hair, right? And so obviously now you got Rasta turn around, they clap back, right? And the sentiment changed where, like, hey, we don't have to, this is Rasta talking. We ain't got to deal with these black folks. We run East Palo Alto. Just our hustle connections, our dope connections, we run this town, right? And it was just a changing of the guard, so to speak. It's not that Rasa needed the black community living in black neighborhoods before. It wasn't a need-based thing. It was just how it was. We're just here, right? But now as the population shifts, you do start getting this crab in a bucket syndrome, right? And you have people that poured their whole lives into making East Palo Alto a particular community, and they're losing it. They're losing it. It looks very different now, right? And that's for a hell of a lot of reasons. And the influx of Raza is not anywhere close to the top of the list, if we're just going to keep it real, right? The cartel wasn't running around evicting people. You know what I'm saying? Folks move into available spaces. What you going to do? But people are more comfortable and familiar with their own, right? So you have generations growing up in these Bay Area cities that are growing up very different than I did, right? Same places, same neighborhoods, but the look is very different. See, they don't grow up and really have to mingle so much, right? They're growing up in communities that's populated primarily by people who look like them. And you're naturally going to kind of turn inward and rock with your own, right? And then, of course, now you got folks who felt like insiders before, now they feel like outsiders. And that's a fucked up feeling. And so there's issues there, right? It's really more about class and that kind of stuff, but it becomes race stuff. So this idea of like Northerners have always rocked with blacks in Northern California is just not true in the street sense. If you look at where all Northerners come from, right? If you look at all the territories, so to speak, of Northern California, the vast majority of Northerners come from places where they don't have a very large black population, right? Very small. You have homeboys that are Africanos that, they're Northerners and they come from places where they are the minority, right? And they grow up around a bunch of Northerners and that's their norm, right? They're used to being the only black dude in the room, right? It's just kind of how it goes. You adapt to where you are. But so those folks come to prison, they don't necessarily have the comfort level with blacks that other Northerners do from where they grew up, right? They're not used to being around, but they're only used to being around Raza and probably, white folks, and that's about it. So this whole dynamic of Northerners and blacks in the same area, it's not like, oh, well, we don't like black people. There's some of that, just like there's some of in the black community, there's some of we don't like these Mexicans. Like let's not fool ourselves. But it's not so much that. It's more so comfort and familiarity, what's normal to you, what are you used to, right? And the whole idea of this alliance, look, it made sense back in the days. They had a shared idea, right? You've got the NF who feels like the MA is oppressing them, right? And the MA feels like the NF is inferior, kind of a thorn in his side, right? But that they run the show. And this isn't me talking shit. It just is what it is, right? You got the ABers, right? Obviously, you got white folks that feel they're superior over black people, right? We fucking newsflash on that one, and so you got black folks that feel like they need to assert themselves, right? And so, and not that it's this noble, peaceful civil rights movement in prison, but just saying shared opposition. So when the MA who view themselves as elite link up with the AB who view themselves as elite, okay, they have a similar mindset in terms of their status, but so does the NF and so does the BGF in the sense of now, if we're David and Goliath, let's get it cracking. And that's not me promoting one or the other or dissing one or the other. That's those are just the facts, right? So, which is fine. It's a long time ago. It is what it is, And then everybody just turned into making money and gangbang. So all that shit went out the window regardless. But those relationships stayed. Those boundaries kind of stayed, which didn't mean that Northerners and Blacks always rock together. Also doesn't mean that there weren't instances of intense collaboration and sometimes life-saving collaboration between some Northerners and some Blacks, right? Like that side is true too. And same thing with Southerners and whites, right? Times that they didn't get along and they kicked it off, and other times of intense collaboration, right? For their mutual advancement. So that just was what it was. Now it's a new era in prison, Now it's the era of end hostilities. I'm all for reducing violence in prison. I'm all for Raza getting along. I'm all for folks not hurting each other because of what half of the state that they're more familiar with or they identify with or they lived in, right? All that stuff's nonsense. People ask me, oh, what about this incident here? What about that incident there? Let's be honest, at least in terms of Raza in particular, right? Any violence that happens in prison is because that's what they were told to do, right? Or they reacted to a situation. But a lot of times on the giving end as opposed to the receiving end to start things off, right? And so they're doing it because they're told to. Don't need another reason, So the particulars of this incident or that, who knows? Not my business, not my politics. And half the people involved don't necessarily know. They're doing it because they're told to, right? And even if they're given a reason, I thought probably bullshit reason too, right? But regardless, now you have North and South, they're getting along. There's a familiarity. There's a familiarity already because we're not that fundamentally different of people. You know what I mean? A little bit different style of dress, but that's changing as the rap culture and the hip hop culture. It's not black culture, but the hip hop culture has expanded, right? And you got generations that have come up in that. So there's not a lot of difference between a lot of Raza down south and Raza of the same age up north, So of course they're gonna rock together, right? Because they can, and it's new. It's like a new thing. This is dope, right? What does that mean for race relations? We're gonna have to see, because you got 5 people over here, the North, that linked up with 20 people over here, the South, and now there are 25 that are kind of rocking together, right? And that's beautiful. They're not fighting each other, but 20 of those 25 have a different history in terms of race relations in prison. You know what I mean? So how that pans out is, we'll see. I don't want to see any alliances break down, right? I don't want to see Raza and Blacks fighting in prison. I don't want to see it in the streets. It's not helpful. It's not beneficial. There is a shared struggle there, regardless of what anybody wants to think, and now you got Raza that is opening doors and creating space and doing things where they're kind of like, look for it, and folks are letting their nuts hang, right? And that's great. It's a beautiful thing. But one's advancement doesn't have to mean another one's downfall. You know what I'm saying? Um, I still have deep relationships with people of all different backgrounds, and I value those. Those are my friends, and I rock with them. Um, that's the difference, though, right? Is some of us came up in communities where that was just our norm, whereas others have been in prison and being told this is how things go because they were told that's how things go. And let's not forget the Black experience varies as well. You know what I mean? The Black dude that grew up down south beefing with Southerners has a different view of raza than the Black dude that grew up in the Bay Area making music with raza, or in Sacramento where they live right next door to each other and they go back generations, right? So it varies over there too. You know what I mean? And what voices win out in the long run, who knows? Uh, I am glad to see solidarity internally. It's a beautiful thing. There's no reason to not have that solidarity internally, except for a couple people on each side in leadership. Uh, I'd like to see that solidarity extended, and I don't have the answers for how that happens, but I think a part of it is just familiarity, right? Getting to know one another, um, expanding your lens in terms of how you see folks. This language of this is a Black thing and this is a brown thing. Wait till you guys hear this book, man, because you're gonna be surprised at how some of you will be surprised at how ignorant statements like that are, because they're not Black and brown things, right? They're culture things that depend on geography and class and a whole bunch of other things. And they change and they repeat. Nobody owns culture. This is not how it works. And no culture comes out of thin air. It builds on this, it borrows from that. That's natural. That's human development. That's cultural development. That's the way shit goes, homie. But stuff like that still creates more division. And for what benefit? Because we can all win. Just like YouTube beefs are lame because there's plenty of channels. And all these channels can do their thing and present their content and get their bag and all that other stuff. And some people like some people won't like others. That's fine. There's a whole shit ton of them out there. Pick what you like, leave what you don't. It doesn't matter, right? But everybody can get views if you make stuff that people want to see, right? Like it's not a thing. Everybody can get money. Everybody can advance, and we probably accomplish a hell of a lot more together than separate. So yes, there are changing views, and I'm not saying who's wrong or who's right, or even if anybody's wrong or right. I don't know. Folks have their own experience, their own priorities, their own agenda. But yes, there are changes, and those changes aren't just in prison. Those changes are in society as well, and we get to decide how we're going to interact in our own surroundings. So, anyways, it's a bit of a complicated topic, man, and I try to make this a short video. I could go on for a long time and spiderweb it out in a bunch of different areas. Again, hopefully, I didn't come across as disrespectful to anybody. If I did, please tap in and let me know how, and we can have this conversation. So anyways, help others move in excellence. That's what homies do. Help others at the same time because you're worth it, and help your community because they need you. Take care.